This is Robert Clotworthy, and you are listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Here are your hosts, James McQuiston, Oak Island theorist and author, along with John Hamels, PhD and historical researcher. Get the whole story right here, brought to you by Rabbit Hole Investigations.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to Oak Island Plus episode 28. I'm Doc Hamels, and always with
Jim McQuiston.
Jim. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, you know what? Our second show was with Art Gennis, modern-day explorer of Nova Scotia. And it was our largest show for a long time, I think, until Laird Niven bumped it out. And Art continued on with his discoveries, and so we thought we'd have him back. And we have a title for this show, I'll put up on the screen there, and it says Nova Scotia, a vision, a fortress, and a country. And what that refers to is that it was a vision, Nova Scotia was. It wanted to be a kind of an ecumenical place where people could go and settle, but they didn't always get along. So they built a fortress, and Art found the fortress. And what we thought was a wall turned out to be a whole compound with a well and all that. Art's going to
I hope to find out more about that today. Yeah, that'd be great.
And before we start with Art, he sent us a map, and I think if we describe that map, it might help the people understand where everything's at. So up on the screen, you'll see, this is would be like the eastern coast of Nova Scotia in the Mahone Bay area.
So this would be just west of Oak Island for most people?
Yeah.
Okay.
Southwest along the coast. And at the very bottom you have the letter A. Well, that is the walls that he found. And he called them a W wall. Then we said, well, maybe it's an M wall because it's at Port Malta. And then he said, let's just call it the zigzag wall. So we're calling it the zigzag wall for now. But the bay that it's in front of, or above actually, is Port Medway, which we found with a little bit of research used to be Port Maltois, which meant Port Maltese, and that's what got us into this great big. And
if people remember, go back and you can look at our two-part shows on the Knights of Malta. We learned all about that from just that wall.
And then if you go up the coast, when you hear us mention La Have and Rosilly, that's just up the coast. It's about halfway to Oak Island, as a matter of fact. And then D is where Oak Island is. And Art had done some measurements on it. The wall to the actual bay or port of Medway is about 3 miles down. But from Port Medway to La Have, where Rosilly historically settled, is 15.75 miles, and 15.75 miles away is Oak Island, which we don't know yet what the significance of that is, but the main point of all that is only 30-some miles from where the Maltese compound was, we're going to call it that now, to Oak Island is only 30 miles away, and sailing is like maybe 2 hours of sailing, 2 or 3 hours of sailing at the most.
And for those just tuning in, the Rosilly was the commander of the Knights of Malta, who were basically in charge of getting rid of the Knights Baronet, or the Scottish settlers that came in the 1620s through a treaty, and the kings all had this agreement. And again, you can go back and look at our other videos on this, but Rosilly was a very important character in the history of the founding of Nova Scotia, and then so forth. So was the British, the Scottish, the French, and back and forth.
And, you know, Art's the one that broke this all open by finding that wall. Then Doc and Art and I kind of all went our separate ways trying to find everything we could about the Knights of Malta. And a few months later, we had more than we could even handle.
Gosh, yes.
We produced a 2-part Oak Island Plus show. And then I actually took what part of the remainder and put it in a book called Oak Island and the Knights of Malta. But there's still more. But what was kind of really refreshing for us was it wasn't too long before we saw the Knights of Malta being mentioned on the Curse of Oak Island, and we're like, yeah. So it really just from that seed of him finding that and then us talking about it, it just blossomed into this whole history that nobody was talking about. And I think it's going to keep going because.
Well, yeah, I can't wait to hear what Art has to say. You know, Jim and I was thinking on the way over here before we started the show. Everybody's been talking about Oak Island and Nova Scotia. I think we've flipped the story. We flipped the narrative. We're talking about the founding of Nova Scotia that includes Oak Island instead of the other way around, because the story is so much bigger than just a little island.
And you know, I think a lot of the theorists finally discover that. You know, they start out with Oak Island, but then pretty soon they're studying Sir Francis Bacon and what he did all through the New World, and it's a big spider web, but it's going to take that to ever solve the problem, the mystery, to ever solve the mystery, unless of course they find a note underground that says this is exactly what happened on Oak Island. So it's ways away, but they're getting ready for a new season, and we wanted to kind of show our appreciation to Art. So let's hear what he has to say.
I can't wait. So stay tuned. We're going to have Art Gennis on Oak Island Plus.
Hello there. Art Gennis is our guest today. And Art got us started off a couple years ago on the Knights of Malta. And we thought we'd have a show that showed our appreciation. His was the longest episode we had for quite a while. I think Laird finally bumped him out of that spot, Laird Niven. And it resulted in a couple two-part show and a book. So, Art, glad to see you here.
Yeah, well, my pleasure to be here. And I do apologize for starting us down that long road of rabbit holes.
Oh, for sure. You know, when Jim and I look back now, Art, it's incredible where where we are today. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that you discovered something. And Jim, let's talk about that a bit, eh?
Well, I'll put it up on the screen right now. This is what we've been calling the M wall. This is only a section of it. Art can elaborate on that, but it was found in 2022, and it was the catalyst for a year's worth of research. We all three went in our own separate directions and kept getting back together, downloading what we found, and we had a two-part episode because we couldn't possibly get it all in one. And even with that, we left a lot out. And then I wrote the book, Oak Island, the Knights of Malta, over it. Next thing we know, it's on the Curse of Oak Island. They're talking about the Knights of Malta. So this really sprung something open just from Art's walk in the woods. So, Art, you want to tell us about that day?
Yeah, it was as simple as a walk in the woods, because up to that time, I'd pretty well been focusing all my research on New Ross and the stone road that we found coming out of Gold River, heading towards New Ross, and then trying to trace the road up further, and eventually finding another what could have been a stone road up in the New Ross area. So, and then exploring the New Ross area. So, as it got to the point where every time I walked by a stone wall or something different looking, you get to the point where you're looking at it differently, wondering what's there. So we happened to be at that time, we just moved from PEI to Nova Scotia, and we've been driving around looking at houses, and we were driving out, actually coming out to have a look at the house we ended up buying, and had my wife driving. I looked out the window to the side, and whoa, there's another stone wall. So, okay, I had to go back and explore that, of course. And that was the very first stone wall we found. And then that led to a few days later, as I was looking around more, to finding what I call the W wall. You guys call the M wall. Now I call it the zigzag wall.
Hey, that's a good compromise.
Yeah.
I only called it an M wall because it was on Port Medway, which turned out to be Port Maltois.
Yeah.
Port of the Maltese.
Yeah.
Well, you used a lot of LiDAR too. Where did you get a hold of all that LiDAR image?
Well, the Nova Scotia government has a website where you can go in, and the lay people like myself can download LiDARs for the whole province. But I don't think there is high density LiDAR as, for instance, uh, someone who was a professional researcher and had the right software, because there were some versions you could download that I couldn't open. So I think those might have been the highest quality ones. But this one did show the M wall or zigzag wall or W wall. It showed up on the LiDAR quite clearly.
Isn't there something too about how many leaves are on the tree that it can actually change the effectiveness of it or something like that?
That's quite possible.
And I think I heard somebody say that they like to do the LiDAR after fall and get a little bit crisper images or something. So
Yeah.
you found the LiDAR first and then looked for the wall, or you happened
No,
on the
no, I
wall?
found all the walls first before I got into using LiDAR. And well, I'd used LiDAR a little bit when we were exploring the new Ross stuff. But yeah, I found the walls first, then I looked at the LiDAR. And it's funny, a lot of the walls that are pretty well as big as what showed up on LiDAR didn't show up on LiDAR, which was kind of, it's all close enough that it would have been taken with the same image. And like the section across the road where I found the walls, plus the well, plus the foundations and all that stuff, um, none of that showed up on LiDAR.
And there's a well right near this zigzag wall then.
Yeah, the zigzag wall, it's my kind of belief that this was originally a compound because the first wall I found and portions of the zigzag wall run kind of parallel, and then there's a highway built right across it, and then it starts again on the other side. So it's like it was a compound type thing. So,
Well, obviously it had something to do with the Knights of Malta, or they wouldn't have called it Port of the Maltese. But
yeah,
there's a story about this character that I've written about a little bit named Villadon, who he went down to Brazil to try to contest the Portuguese down there. And
yeah,
he wrote the very first thing they did when they got off the boat was build a defensive wall before they brought anything to shore, because obviously if they think there's a risk of them getting attacked, they're going to have some kind of defense. So it would stand to reason that they build a defensive wall first, then they built the compound and lived there for a while or tried to live there or whatever. And you said that there's no chance that this really is like a farmer's fieldstone wall just simply because it's not arable.
yeah. The land surrounding the walls, what I would call the compound, is way too rough and rugged. Like it's hard just to walk through it, let alone try to do anything else. Now, within the inside of the walls, it's where they appear to have gathered their stone. The ground's a little smoother, but there's not enough ground there. You know, 3 sheep and a goat can strip that in a week. So it's yeah, it's very interesting. It's funny, nobody in the area, in terms of historians such as the Heritage Nova Scotia, the government department, the people at the Queens County Museum, even the fellow who's reported to be the best historian of this area, none of them had any idea these walls existed.
Wow, that's just crazy.
Yeah. Now my
You know,
neighbor, he's a little bit older than me, which puts him right up there. Um, he was telling me that when he was a young fella, he remembers hearing about these walls from his grandparents. And they were talking about how there used to be structures there, which makes place with the foundations, but never any talk about how they got there or where they got there. And so, you know, while the people at the Queens County Museum try to say, well, these have to be 1800 walls because that's when all the walls in Queens County were built. Well, they've never even seen the walls.
yeah.
And a lot of these walls don't look anything like those walls that were built in the 1800s by the English as they settled the area.
I was going to ask you, are these like rubble filled walls?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're double-sided walls.
Yeah.
Yep, double-sided stone walls.
And I don't know if you guys will remember on Curse of Oak Island on one episode they had a forester, I guess he was, came in and he talked about the double faced walls,
Yeah.
rubble filled, and he said that's a English or Scottish built type of a wall. That's what he would place it as. I looked it up, and yeah, it is because they don't fall over. That's why that thing's still standing. They're leaning against each other with rubble in the middle, and so they don't have a chance to fall over. So, um,
I
Yeah,
think
it's
that when
actually
the
just
I think when the fellows from the Curse of Oak Island went to Portugal, somebody said that these walls were ones built in Portugal then. But they're actually, I started looking up these double-sided walls and they're all over. They're much more of a Roman invent way back when, which pushed them all over Europe.
well, what works works. I mean, if
Yeah,
you're not going to want to rebuild your walls every 3 years, so
yeah.
you build it in a way that works. You build a road in the way that it works.
I want to ask you a question that I asked Laird Niven about a year and a half ago. You grew up in Canada, and in that area, did you guys learn about the Knights Baronet, William Alexander, the Knights of Malta? It all of a sudden it seems like we've been talking about Jim and I and you, but the rest of the world's going like, where'd this all come from?
Yeah, it's interesting. It didn't seem to make the history books.
Uh,
Like there is the the Knights of Malta. It is somewhat known in that in Le Havre, where as de Brazili settled and built a little fort in 1632, there is a museum called Fort Point Museum, which has a lot of Knights of Malta stuff in it. And there is a statue of Sir William Alexander in Halifax, but it didn't make the history books. At least not that I saw. Now at the university level, I'm sure there was some discussion of it, but in terms of the high school level, for many of the courses I took, everything pointed to Quebec City all the time. And Vic didn't get a whole lot of recognition down this way at all.
well, and Quebec was part and parcel of all this. William Alexander's the second charter went almost to Quebec. He claimed that he owned land across the St. Lawrence on the shoreline over there that head down to Quebec. And basically, they chased Champlain and everybody out of Nova Scotia. They went all over. They went over to Quebec. So
Yeah.
it's like a combined history. But we've mentioned this before, and I talked to a couple of other Oak Island people, theorists, whatever, about it, and it seems like it's the way it was put to me is it's hard to get a job in archaeology. So if you end up getting a high level job, the last thing you're going to want to do is take on a controversial subject because
Yeah.
you might lose your high level job, and
Yeah.
you're sitting golden already because you got that high level job. And we ran into it with the whole New Ross. Terry DeVoe helped me with an article on New Ross, and we ran into there. I ran into it with the lady supposed to be the expert on Merligash and the early maps, and I showed her maps that proved that Merligash wasn't Lunenburg, and her last answer was, "Well, I can't explain it," but she wouldn't accept it. She couldn't explain it, but she wouldn't accept it. So we've run into that a lot, and I guess you just grin and bear it, and you just keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah.
But you talked to the Knights of Malta in Canada, right? I mean, you got a book from them, if I remember right.
Yeah, I've reached out to them and I got a hold of their head historian, who actually is he's at St. Mike's, but I think whatever St. Mike's is. But anyway, the head historian, he sent down a couple of things for me, and it gave quite a history of the involvement of the Knights of Malta in the early settlement of Canada. And essentially, from what I've read through all of that and other things I've read, if you come across French artifacts from the 1600s to early 1700s in Eastern Canada, there's a very high probability they originated with the Knights of Malta. So,
Oh, cool. And really, I hadn't even realized. I knew Razilli came and drove out the final Scots,
yeah,
but I didn't realize how supported he was by the Knights of Malta. It wasn't just him; it was the whole movement of the
yeah,
French being led basically by they could have been French or they could have been Maltese. I don't know, but they were obviously Razilli was French, but they were there specifically to get the Scottish knights out of there. They were all wanted the land, but I think also I've been developing this theory more and more that they wanted the fur trade because it was major business. I mean, we've just been stumbling over new records of how many beaver pelts they were taking out. It's phenomenal. And then, of course, there's the story about William Alexander being the first person in history to have a beaver sitting on the top of the coat of arms. Usually it's a helmet, but he had a beaver put up there. So obviously it was a big business. So
what's your read on New Ross now that you've been up there and had an opportunity to see the walls and the well? We feel strongly that that was the compound for the Alexanders, in the 1620s. But is there any local legends or any feel of what's going on there?
I've been talking to some people involved in the history from up there, and they do acknowledge that before Captain Ross settled there, that there were or what was or were a structure or structures in New Ross, but they weren't a castle. They were more of a residence of some sort. But no one seems to know a whole lot about them. But they do acknowledge they were there. I've never seen the foundations, just pictures of them.
Mhm.
But there's all kinds of areas up there where something could have been. They could have been on that foundation, but that foundation isn't very big, so it kind of relative to what a castle would be, so it kind of fits into what they were saying about being more some sort of a residence and stuff there. They do have some nice farmland up that way, but it's also pretty hilly in parts of it as well. So I think there's a lot more research could be done there, a lot more.
well, in that article I wrote that Terry DeVoe forced me to footnote. And honest God, I think we spent 3 months on it, and the footnotes were about a mile long, and they still wouldn't accept it, which was disappointing to him too. But I think Doc and I came to the conclusion too that it wasn't a castle per se. It was an estate. And it was basically, I guess it was stick built on top of a stone foundation, like a million other. Both Doc and I grew up in homes that were stick built on top of stone, not cemented stone. It was stacked stone for my dad's first apartment house.
Same here, right?
And so it was a common thing to do back then. They knew how to do it. And the other thing that tells that tale is the fact that supposedly it was burnt down. Well, how do you burn down a stone castle?
Yeah.
But it'd be pretty easy to burn down a wooden estate. So, but the one little thing that's funny about that is I've been up to that basic location twice, and I don't know if you've been there at all yet, but when you're trying to pull out, it's a blind corner because right on the edge is a big kind of a bluff or a mound that you have to look past. Well, if you look at all four pictures that purport to be that castle, all four of them have an edge like that in the same exact corner. So, some things remain, some get lost, but and we're delving into an area where a lot of history was lost. And, we've kind of had a three-prong approach to this. One is what was written contemporaneously, whether it was in the King's Privy Council minutes or a letter somebody wrote or a family history or whatever. The other one is the artifacts themselves and the dating on them, particularly because there's a lot of 16, 20, 30 dating on Oak Island. A lot of the middle of the swamp seems to carry that date. Around the outside, it seems to carry the later 1600 dates. But I can list like 8 artifacts that dated right into the 1620s or 30s. So something was happening there. I mean, it would be a real coincidence if they all joined together like that. But the third one is the maps, which we've made great use of. We in our Roosevelt episode, which essentially was kind of our Merligash episode also, we showed a lot of maps, and we showed the similarities and how Merligash literally was written about in 1630 and was on a map as late as 1755. And Doc said, wow, that's 125 years for this place. Yeah. And yet before we were analyzing it, you wouldn't think that the thing was just a little neighborhood that they talked about it once or twice. And here it was. Do you think it's all possible? I mean, this is total speculation, but do you think it's at all possible that Rosilli first parked himself at Port Neltois and built a compound there until he realized that LaHave would perhaps give him more protection or something, because somebody big did that. I mean,
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
work.
It wasn't a simple job. It's possible. There's so many possible theories on that one. And another theory that I had was that after Rosilli got turned down for building the naval base in what is now Halifax Harbor,
You know?
that upon realizing that his fort at La Have was indefensible, really, he was a sitting duck there, right on the coast with a wooden fort. Three British warships rolled down there. They flattened the thing in a matter of hours with their cannon. He
Yeah.
had no protection at all. That maybe after he was turned down for developing his base in what's now Halifax Harbor, that maybe he went down to Port, because he'd been right past Port Maltois. He'd been right down in that area, maybe even been in Port Maltois. We don't know but we do know he was down to Liverpool, called Port Rossignol at the time,
Yeah.
which is just the other side of Port Maltois. So he had to go sail right past it. And if you're curious and looking at stuff along like as he was, he must have sailed in there. And there's a lot of theory that Champlain named it Port Maltois, even though I can't find any written record or any
I
map.
either.
That there's all kinds of other things I'm still trying to find, but there is, lots of general consensus that that's how it happened, but there's no proof of that. But Champlain himself had connections back to the Knights of Malta, as you've
Yeah.
talked about before. So there is a good chance, because if you went in there to where that compound, as I keep calling it, is located, is you would never get a big ship up the Medway River up to where that is. You'd have to park the ship in the main harbor, which again is quite well protected, and then you take your longboats and go up, or there's an old road that leads up relatively close to this. So you'd either go overland on following, there was probably just an old trail at the time up to it, or you would take your longboats and go up and pull them up to the shore, because from there you're only maybe 500 feet at the most from where this compound is. So you got a wonderful defense because your big ships can't see it or get to it. And if you come up there on your little boats and you get off and you start walking through the swamps and muck and everything you've got to get to where a compound is, you're sitting ducks for your archers or your riflemen or your whoever is your defense.
And you said that zigzag wall pretty much faced down towards where anybody would be trying to gain the hill.
Yeah.
So they'd be, again,
And it reminded me of Rosilli's fort, uh, Marie Grace, I forget whatever it's called, in La Have, and that when you go into the museum at Fort Point, where the original fort built by Rosilli was, they've got a model of what they've determined the original fort looked like, and it has zigzags on both ends. So and then you go up to this one and you get zigzag, but the zigzags are just on one end. But again, that's the end where an attack would be most likely to come from. And I chuckled because I was sitting there one day thinking, man, I can't find any evidence that who built this fort or that there was anyone knew of a fort being there or anything. Then all of a sudden it occurred to me, there's no evidence, written evidence of anything that happened on Oak Island.
yeah.
Absolutely nothing, but just boots on the ground to figure it out. So that's where I love to get a date on those walls down at that compound. Same with the stone road leading towards Gold River. It'd been lovely to have the resources to get those things dated.
Well, if in fact that would date to the zigzag wall would date to the 1632 to 35 roughly period,
Yeah.
that would just tear it that it had to be Rosilli, because there's
Yeah.
not going to be some other giant force a stone's throw away from him building the compound.
Yeah.
Well, as far as the naming of it too, I did the same thing. I looked at all kinds of Champlain maps, and it doesn't appear on any of them. So it could well be that Rosilli's the one that named it. Something that I found out just recently was that he had a Champlain had a Scotsman named William Douglas, who figured that name figures in our theories a million times, but he was a pilot and he actually sailed from France with them, and or a ship's captain. He's given both ways, a pilot and a ship's captain. But he had special assignments, like they would send, or Champlain would send him someplace to pick somebody up or whatever. But he named that strait between Cape Breton and the mainland as Port, or as Strait Passage Douglas, after this William Douglas. He had it on his 1612 map and I think a 1632 map, and then he changed it on his next two maps to some other name. So that kind of is another mystery of why did he change it. But he named so many things. So why he's got names all up and down that he named. Why didn't he?
He was associated with the Knights of Malta, wasn't he?
Yeah. Well, the original guy that sent them all over, Amar de Chase, he died before they got there, but he was a Knight of Malta.
Yeah.
And there were other peripheral connections. Now, when Razilli went, I believe his brother and his nephew, who were also Knights of Malta, went. So that would have strengthened it. But who knows? He sent 300 men. How do we know how many were Knights of Malta and how many were just farmers or something?
We know most of the key people, so to speak, were Knights of Malta. Well, really, I think the Knights of Malta were given the responsibility of settling that whole area of New France through the 1600s into the 1700s, because pretty near everybody that went was either from the senior roles, was either a Knight of Malta or connected to them somehow.
And I found an old newspaper article, believe it or not, from 1632, talking about Razilli going there, and I had it translated by a French-English translator. I shared it with Doc the other day, and it's pretty amazing. I mean, they're just coming right out and saying he's on his way over there to get rid of those Scots and to take that area over. I mean, they don't make any bones about it.
It's pretty detailed, I have to agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the case there again of something that was written contemporaneously. I think that's where all the gold is. You're going to find it in anything that's contemporaneous, whether it's written, whether it's a map, or whether it's an actual artifact. And that's kind of where all the focus has to go. And I think to some degree, that's where ours have been. I don't think we ever said it before quite like that, but we certainly made use of maps a lot. Well, we had those two barefoot maps.
Yeah.
And by the way, here's just a little incidental that I shared with Doc this morning, but I got to wondering where all the guys that were involved in that in the Strachan Keith robbery settled, and they all settled at St. John, New Brunswick. Whether they were actually personally there or not, Strachan Slan was there. William Keith, who was the son that inherited everything but was obviously in on it, settled there. William Douglas, who was named the co-conspirator, settled there, and Livingston, David Livingston, who was like the bondsman for Strachan at his trial, settled there. So, like Doc said, it was a den of thieves. But I thought, well, maybe they're digging in the wrong place. Maybe they should go to St. John and start digging a big.
Yeah, well, there are ruins in St. John, that's for sure.
Yeah,
and lots of old buildings. My son lived there for a while. I was never a great fan of St. John, but it's a wonderful port city and lots of beautiful old buildings. But
well, the other thing that I discovered along that story, that Franklin's boyhood camp where they would go for the summer, was camp. I'm probably going to say it wrong, but Campobella Island, which is only 60 miles by land from St. John, and less by sea, of course, because they're both right on the sea. So I wonder if the family knew about all of this, which by our last Oak Island Plus that we did, it seems like they did. They had their hands in it so deeply. Maybe they planted themselves there so they could go up and down the coast there and try to figure it out. They're thought of as being Dutch, but they had a ton. I mean, they were half Scottish. They were related to the Livingstons and to the Douglases particularly, and so they would know all that. In fact, one of Eleanor's uh, would it be forefather, he was actually named as the commissioner of the Knights Baronet Colony in 1631. So I mean, it's like, how can you get any closer to this story? So I think we've been saying it for a long time, and certainly what you opened up here is proving it. This is so much bigger than Oak Island. Oak Island turns out to be an incidental stop on the way, but and what that stop is what everybody wants to know, whether it was a trading post or whether it was a deposit of gold and silver.
Yeah.
So anyways, it's intriguing, and it's the driving force behind all this. There's people all over the world doing what we're doing, except that I think we tend to be more practical. We have a theory you can voice where some of the theories are, wouldn't it be nice, or I think, or whatever, but not look at this date, look at this person, look at this zigzag wall, and then
and we have some of these theories that are like that, just a theory. I got this thing where something's possible, and then as you start to look into it, as you start down that rabbit hole of something that's possible, then you start to move to, okay, is it probable or is it improbable? And just like my whole thing about Brazili possibly building that compound after he was turned down for Halifax. That's just a theory. There's zero proof of it. No matter how hard we've looked, there is zero proof. But there's so much of it that you look in, you try to find, okay, you get your idea that starts you down the rabbit hole. And then in that rabbit hole, you're looking for something to back it up, to prove it or disprove it. And sometimes the rabbit holes lead you to success. Sometimes, well, you drown in failure. But
or another 10 rabbit holes.
Or you drown in more rabbit holes, because we'll be looking at something and Doc will find something that really only has a little bit to do with our current rabbit hole, but it opens up a whole new one. Oh God, we'll have to look at that as soon as we get time to look into that one. Well, and again, what's probable, if it's not arable land, it's facing the port and it's built as a defensive wall. If it looks like a duck and acts like a duck and sounds like a duck, it's likely a duck. Now you could go back in time and take a photograph of who was stacking those rocks, but why would you come up with another? And that's the one thing I've done through the years is you take that same information and you tell me a different story. We're thinking about all possibilities. It's not like we're stuck on just the Knights Baronet or on one person or anything. We're thinking about all the different things. Certainly, would you say that it's probably not First Nations built?
I really have no idea on that. Laird would have a better idea on something like that because he's done work in that area. I have no idea. I would purely be guessing on that one.
And Doc's done a lot of study on the Mi'kmaq, and I'm guessing his opinion would be no, but go ahead, Doc.
Would say no as well. I think if anything, they may have assisted in the process because they worked so closely with the Scots and the French over time. And but they were traders and they're hunters, and they had other things to do like surviving. But guys, we're running about 7 minutes more on this session. So Jim, would you like to give Art an opportunity to kind of wrap up what he's thinking, what's going on up there, or what would you like to do here?
Yeah, and not just at the zigzag wall, but the whole. You've probably explored it as much or more than anyone. The roads, the walls, the wells that are just wasting away under brush and whatever. What do you have a kind of an overall opinion of what could have been going on?
You mean in just in the Port Maltois area?
Well, let's say from there on up to New Ross, that whole general region in there.
I think there's a story to be told at New Ross because I've looked with what I found just by trotting around in the woods, plus looking at LiDAR maps, plus looking at other maps. I think there was a connecting road between Gold River and New Ross going back. How far back? Who knows? At and then you look on you trot around up in New Ross as well. There's all kinds of mounds of stones, and I found one area that had what looked like another old stone roadway with French drains going underneath it, and
Really?
just all kinds of things that I think there's definitely a story to be told, but it's again the same thing we run into when trying to date that stone road up near Gold River or date these walls for Port Maltois. That's almost like it's the next step that we need to have happen. And um, we're trying to reach out to some university people who maybe help out with that. But you got to have the resources and the know-how, and then you got to work with the landowners and all that to get that done. So it's a quite a commitment of time and resources to do that. But that it would be so great to have both of those things or several of those things just age, just same way they age the stone road on Oak Island, the same concept. You dig down under the rocks, get a stick of wood from under the rocks, and send that off for C14 dating. It would be because that way, depending what it comes back as, okay, that eliminates this story, but keeps this story going, or that, oh wow, that points back to something else. That's the big almost like next step.
Well, and that wall on lot 26, I believe it was,
Yeah,
we lucked out there because they did find charcoal under it, which
yeah,
Laird told us on his show that that's the ultimate because it's a moment in time that you don't have a fire burning for years. You generally have it burning for a week or two or something.
yeah,
And that dated to as late as 1638, dated
yeah,
earlier too, but that encompasses our time period too. So,
yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. Boy,
Yeah.
just the way to date stacked rocks.
Yeah. For those M walls down Port Medway, you'd be almost be able to find something like that because we've got foundations and we've got a well, so that'd be the activity area.
Somebody
So
dropped something.
yeah, someone's dropped
Well,
something up there.
true. That's true, Doc.
So
Yep.
Oh, get Gary in there with his
yeah.
detector and start looking.
The locals, do they feel that there's treasure on Oak Island, or are they kind of burned out on all this? I'm sorry.
I don't know. I think there's a lot more of a story to be told yet, and the only way it's going
Mhm.
to be told is through, like Rick says, boots on the ground.
Right.
There's a whole lot of theories from all kinds of different angles, and there's stuff being uncovered. But I think the archaeology work that Laird and his crew were doing, and the digging around in the swamp, that all this work that they're doing on the ground, and they're digging some big holes this year from what I'm hearing down there. There's pictures on the internet
Right. Huge.
of that, and
Okay.
Well,
I
and they're so data overwhelmed,
yeah,
because the show tends to want the next new shiny thing,
yeah,
even if they just filmed the last new shiny thing yesterday. And so things get put off to the side, but you literally could crunch data and old records and GIS and GPS coordinates and stuff till the cows came home
yeah,
to try to build the story better. So
yeah,
it's a long-term project, I think, to figure it out. Whether the
yeah,
show lasts that long term is
yeah.
probably the big question. And Laird did tell us that he made the comment when the show's gone, the archaeology is going to continue.
Yeah, they found thousands and thousands of artifacts on Lot 5, and we of course we've got our own little theory that Rizzili was actually on Oak Island at Lot 5 at one point in time. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I like
Guys,
that.
we're about out of time. And so, Art, how about last word before we go?
that's well, I don't think the story will ever be fully told. There's just so much information to gather. They, I think they're going to find out more history as they do more boots on the ground and archaeology on Oak Island. But in terms of the whole South Shore, the total involvements of the Knights of Malta and of other groups, there's so much more to learn. But I don't know how to learn it.
Well, we certainly thank you for taking time with us today. And Jim, I'll let you wrap up in the next 20 seconds here.
Oh, well, I would just thank you particularly for getting us started down this Knights of Malta. I mean, it was quite the joy for the three of us to be working on it for almost a year and finding gems here and there. So
Yeah.
thank you for contacting me a long time ago in the first place, and then taking a walk and finding that M wall.
Yeah.
It opened up a big world that nobody knew about.
Jim, that was quite a interview with Art Gennis again. He had just nuggets of information and references, and if you watch carefully and listen carefully, he points you to museums and locations that most people don't even know about.
And he's on the case. I mean, he is really on the case. We probably don't know half of what he's doing, but the whole fact that he found that compound out back, we just thought it was a wall. Turns out to be there were buildings back there. There's a well, and I guess he sounds like he's getting help from some sources to try to sort it all out.
He's still on the case, that's for sure. I was thinking after we had a talk with Art, was that my own son's property here down the road in Ripley has multiple foundations that are just foundations, and over time people build something and they leave it, they build over it, they leave that, then they go on to other things. So I think Art's onto something here, where he's found these walls and foundation parts, and I hope he gets back to us. I'm really excited to see what's going on, especially about New Ross.
Well, I like what he said about even the oldest old-time historian that he talked to could only remember as a child his parents talking about those walls. Nobody knew what they were. And the other thing I'm hoping is that they find a bit of charcoal like they did on Oak Island under that wall. On
so those walls really need to be
26,
explored.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to tell a lot about Lot 5. And I think it's going to tell a lot more the story of Oak Island from the Nova Scotia point of view.
And who would have known, watching The Curse of Oak Island, and you see these old wells and old walls and old roads and stuff. Now you find out, basically because of Art, they're all over the mainland in that area. It was a big, big story. And I don't think it'll ever return to just the story of Oak Island. It certainly won't in our case. So it was a wonderful interview. He's a great guy.
Special thanks to Art Gennis for joining us yesterday.
Thank you, Art.
On the show, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. So, Jim, I think we're about done. What do you think? Yep. All right, folks. So stay tuned for next month. We got another show really ready to go. And check us out on Facebook from time to time. And please subscribe for this YouTube channel. I'm Doc Hamill signing off. And
Jim McQuiston, and thanks for being here.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.
This is Robert Clotworthy, and you have been listening to Oak Island Plus, a discussion of Oak Island and other mysteries from around the world. Be sure to catch every episode.